Well, Marie, I'm so glad that we had a chance to talk about this wonderful piece that's in the Small Wonders exhibition for a few more, another week or two. Um, and part of the reason is I'm a photographer. Part of the reason is that as an undergraduate, I was an English major, a literature major, if you will, concentrating on American literature. And and then I became an artist historian concentrating on American art, and now I'm a photographer. So I've got about four different ways I personally would like to talk to you. But since we're really doing this for the listening audience, viewing audience, and trying to get them to connect with you and your work a little more, I'm just going to dive right in with the most obvious thing, and that's the title. And the fact that you're very interested in Edgar Allan Poe's work, and you're working on a series, I think, on the women in Poe's writing. Is that true?
Yeah, I just started it. It was kind of inspired by the work that I made this summer using the wet plate collodion process. I did a whole series of self-portraits, and a lot of them were taken outside in the middle of the summer. And I was like, who is this person that I'm photographing? Because it didn't really quite feel like me. And having grown up in Maryland, and working in Baltimore a lot, Poe is everywhere.
Yes.
And I kind of just started thinking about him separate from this work. Like even outside of the central branch of the Pratt Library right now, his face is everywhere. And I
Mhm.
realized I know the Raven, I know the cask of Amontillado, but I don't really know that much about him. And I realized that he died in 1849. And Annabel Lee was published a few days after his death. He wrote it of maybe a couple months before he died or something like that. And then it was largely published. It was meant to be published in 1850. And wet plate collodion was conveniently invented in 1851. And I just felt like this timeline
Mhm.
of
Mhm.
events was really interesting. And there's daguerreotypes of Poe that we have from, I think the last one was right before he left Richmond for the last time, but he never got to experience the wet plate collodion process. And through his women in his poems, I kind of want to explore uh, what his life was like, what these women's lives might have been like. Um, and,
Well, that's a big chunk and a lot of things to think about, and pretty ambitious uh, goal that you've set for yourself. So I'm glad, and I look forward to seeing more of the images. But this image, to me, with my background, makes me immediately think of a couple of different questions. And one is, this is, as you said, it's a self-portrait as Annabelle Lee. It's not that unusual in the history of art for an artist to use themselves as a model. But this seems laden with all kinds of different possible meanings and interpretations, and isn't the typical way where you're doing it more or less for convenience sake.
yeah,
So, can you unfold that a little bit for us?
yeah.
I'm intrigued at knowing what you have to say about that.
I mean, I've always loved self-portraiture. I had a professor in college who told me you're most available to yourself, and I took that to heart and really ran with it. And so I've always used myself as a way of making photos. And this summer, when I was working on these pieces, I needed to, it was either wait to have someone ready to model, or it was again use
Mhm.
myself. And thinking about the poem Annabel Lee, I look really kind of rabid and kind of wild in this photo.
Mhm.
But
Mhm. Yeah.
I actually set the camera up in the creek. And so the at the bottom is the little footbridge, and that goes across the creek. And so what I had to do was take the lens cap off, run underneath
Sure.
of run under the bridge, through the creek, and then pose. And what I'm trying to do, it looks like I'm kind of shaking my fist. That's actually me holding a branch, trying to steady myself.
Uh-huh.
And then I had to run back under the bridge, put the lens cap on, and quickly go process it. So I was thinking about the lady in the water. Why did she looks, you can't plan everything in wet plate. You can't plan a lot of stuff in wet plate. So I didn't know that I was going to look so sort of angry in it. I thought it might turn out kind of elegant, and I was using my book as the focal point. And I just started again thinking about the that timeline of Poe having died right around the time that wet plate was invented. And
Well, that's
it
that's a
almost
fascinating and still a very complex way of thinking about it. But before you go on, I just want to ask this. Are you trying to present yourself as Annabelle Lee, or is the poem and the woman that's the subject of that poem simply an inspiration for you? You know, are you trying to represent Annabelle Lee as you understand it from the poem, or are you being yourself and it's more of a jumping off point, the poem?
um, to be honest, I really felt like this was like if Annabelle Lee came back from the dead.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Because we get a lot of ghostly images in wet plate collodion because of the nature of the process, especially with a minute-long exposure. I'm not going to be crystal clear, especially if I'm the one with the lens cap. And
Yeah.
so I don't know. I thought it's really interesting that Poe became this famous guy, and he used women a lot as a subject matter, but we don't really know. No one knows for sure exactly who Annabelle Lee is,
Mhm.
and we'll
Mhm.
never know for sure, even though people have guesses. And so I just kind of like this idea of using these women that we don't know much about as characters in these photos and
Well,
sort of exploring that. And so using myself to do that.
yeah. Well, that still like makes a lot of different sort of layers that you could peel back. But it also gives you a very great latitude for spontaneity and creativity too. And so is that sort of what you just talked about, the way you'll approach the other works in the series?
Yeah, that's the plan. And I
Yeah.
might do multiple Annabelle Lees. I might make one, about his mother. I kind of just want to explore more about the history of him, and
Yes.
then read more of his poetry, and then sort of see what comes from that. Because a lot of my favorite part of this process, especially when you are working in natural light, is that it gets you outside.
Yeah.
And being in nature for me is super inspiring. I spend a lot of the time in the city, so it's nice when I'm actually out in the field. Um, I'm excited to kind of explore how I can connect to nature using these women as characters and sort of explore this process that is really complicated.
Well, I think I signed up to be on your email list. And if I didn't, I hope you'll keep me informed because I want to see this series when it's done.
Thanks.
I think it sounds absolutely amazing. But now we are trying to do this as a short format so our staff can get it edited and get it out, and people can see what you're doing and come to perhaps admire it at the Small Wonders exhibition at our Circle Gallery. But there's really a lot of other things that you've made me even more curious about. But I'm going to stick to what we have right here in this work, and that is you call it Annabelle Lee, Paw Paw, West Virginia. And I noticed that another of the pieces that you sent that we may or may not have time to look at was taken in a place called Dundee, New York.
Yeah.
Now, those are not places. I'm kind of um, a map, not a map nerd because I'm not that serious about it, but I enjoy old maps and looking at maps and traveling off the interstates and all of that. why Paw Paw, West Virginia, and where is, I know where that is, but where is Dundee, New York, and why these two small towns?
So that one's really simple. I had multiple wet plate classes there that I essentially put myself in tintype boot camp this
Uh-huh.
summer because I first took this class with wet plate at UMBC in 2017, and then went on to assist a guy, Jay Gould, with wet plate collodion for about 5 years or so. And it was at the beginning of this year that I was like, I want to dedicate a lot of my practice to this process. And there's a lot of chemistry that goes into this process. And I find it really intimidating, or at least I did. And, wet plate is a combination of silver nitrate and collodion. And you can buy that collodion that's been treated with a couple different salts online, or you can mix it all yourself. And silver nitrate can blind you. It can cause blindness if it gets in your eye. And so these are things that I was nervous about. And I knew if I wanted to dedicate my process to them, I needed to get used to all of this.
Hmm.
So I invested in a couple classes, one of which was in Paw Paw, West Virginia, with a woman named Lisa Elmaleh, who actually won a Guggenheim this year. Yay, Lisa. We're
Oh,
very,
yeah.
she's amazing. And then the other class is by John Coffer, who essentially brought the wet plate collodion process back from the dead in the 70s. And he has land in Dundee, New York, which is in the Finger
Oh,
Lakes region of
uh-huh.
upstate New York. And he has classes all like pretty much all throughout the summer and spring. Anytime it's not snowing up there.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah, he's a very interesting guy. He traveled around the country on a horse-drawn wagon, uh, teaching himself this process that had been a lost art for a long time. And
Well, that makes me
yeah,
now that I think gives a very good reason for us to jump to the image that you shared with us from Dundee and take a look at it. I think what you're saying is so fascinating. Let's continue with this, and
yeah.
it's the Amish buggy, horse-drawn buggy that really uh, catches my attention for a number of different reasons. But I want to know if it had any special significance to you, or whether it was just because this fellow you were studying with had gone around the country with a horse-drawn carriage or whatever. But why? It's a beautiful image. Beautiful light and beautiful way that you've handled the shadows and the white lines on the road. I mean, it's a wonderful work of art. But is there any connection or significance to the Amish buggy?
I mean, John Coffer is such an interesting guy. So as soon as I stayed on his land, I got to camp on his land when I was there. So anytime I'm anywhere, I am going to be bringing my film camera, especially if I'm, you know, in a position like taking a class where I'm going to have some downtime. And so I had my Hasselblad with me all week. And, John Coffer had taken the wet plate collodion process on the road, and he has all of these stunning tintypes of the area. And so I wasn't quite, I didn't have all the materials to bring the tintype stuff on the road with me while I was up there, but I had my Hasselblad. So anytime any morning I was there, I'd wake up with the sun and go out and, eventually go find a turkey sandwich that I'd have for lunch later. But, mostly I was just trying to see what I could see and,
Yeah.
get inspired for the day. And so this was out front of a place where I was getting a sandwich from. And this was kind of a decisive moment because even though I think this was a Sunday. So they were all out going to church. And so it's all of these carriages out. It's really for someone that spends a lot of time in Baltimore City, where we have only a couple people that are riding horses here.
Yeah,
It,
yeah.
it's really, it was really something. So when I saw that, I tried my best to capture it, and I panned a little bit, which is sometimes
Hmm.
hard to do
Hmm.
with the film camera.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, you did a great job, I think, of using the light so that you have all this sun-filled landscape that the carriage and the horse are such dark silhouettes. It really emphasizes their presence. But kind of on the same note, but a minor note, you know that there are Amish communities in St. Mary's County, Maryland, right? And
yeah, no, I
over
know that
around Dover. Yeah,
yeah, they're around. It's just, where I am located most of the
yeah,
time, I don't really see it. And so
yeah,
it's
yeah,
really cool. And grew up with a dad that does a lot with his hands and works on his own cars. And so I have a lot of respect for people that
yeah,
live
yeah.
live that way, even if we don't, share the same religion.
Yeah, 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 yeah. But and it's also interesting. Before we move on, I was taking a long road trip in southern Ontario about a year ago, about a little more than a year ago, and I didn't know there was an Amish community there, and there was a woman in a carriage just like this by herself with a horse, and it was something was broken and she was between the horse and the carriage trying to fix it. And I got a very nice photograph that I've lost. I
Oh,
can't find it.
don't you hate it when
Very
that
much,
happens?
yeah, very much like this one. But we are using up our time quickly, and so can you just for sort of those books, the Internet for Dummies and that kind, can you sort of help those of us who have not put our hands on tin types, making them, what it is that process is? Just a real thumbnail description so we have a better idea. I know what it is, though I've not done it, and I know how complicated it is and what a challenge it is. So I hope you can share some of that with the viewers.
Yeah, so essentially, wet plate collodion photography is a combination of silver nitrate and collodion, which is the same similar collodion that they use to like heal wounds, and so it's very viscous. And the silver nitrate and the collodion, you pour the collodion onto a plate. This can be a glass plate or an aluminum plate, which is why tin type is a misnomer. They never actually used tin. The one that you're looking at right now, this is a ferrotype. So this was actually printed on the back of an old can. So like an old cookie tin that's been cut
Hmm. Hmm.
down and then coated with black. And so this is as close to the 19th century photos as you can get because it's been printed on a mild steel, which is what they would have been using at the time. So that's why this is a ferrotype and not a tin type. Most wet plate photography photographers are using aluminum and trophy metal because it's been coated with black already, like the same trophy metal you'd use to engrave for your kids' like soccer
Oh, really? I did not
soccer
know
team.
that photographers were doing that. Now,
That's
do you
what
think
everyone's
does that
using.
simplify it and make it quicker?
Yeah, because you can order as much as you want. There's different companies. You can order from a company that actually sells the trophy medal, and then there's also photographic companies that sell it because they know that people are making wet
Yeah.
plate. And then yeah, of course you can also print on glass and make things like glass negatives, which can be loaded into an enlarger and make really beautiful images. But it's a one of one print, so I often describe it as like a really old school Polaroid because I think that's a
Yeah.
one way for
Yes.
most people to really understand it. But yeah, so basically you take this piece of aluminum, I have one here, and then you pour collodion on it, and then you go into your dark room and you put the plate in a bath of silver nitrate. Um, and it sits there for about 3 minutes, and then you take it out in safe light, load it into a holder, insert it into the back of your camera, make your picture, which depending on your light can be anywhere from a second exposure time or, multiple minutes. I think I did one that was like 2 or 3 minutes. But the ISO, meaning the light sensitivity of the plate, is less than 1.
Oh,
So if it refers to the light sensitivity of the film or the sensor in your digital camera usually. And so usually you're shooting at something like 800, 1,000, 400. So less than 1 means that this is not light sensitive at all, and it
yeah.
requires a lot of UV or blue light. And then wet plate collodion, meaning that you have to expose the picture while it's still wet. So within a 10 or 15-minute period before it dries out. And there's something called dry plate photography, but that's a whole different rabbit
Yeah,
hole.
that's a whole different thing.
Yeah.
Uh, and since you're not exploring that, we'll skip it for the time being. But that was a wonderful explanation. I think that I hope will help people understand that what you're doing while you're doing it for these wonderful subtle effects of light and contrast and all these things that you are doing, there's still a lot of unpredictability, variability, things that you can't anticipate. So you're really giving yourself, I think, a very substantial challenge above and beyond the challenge of making beautiful photographs. And so the last question I think we have time to take up is I never got serious about making photographs until I got my first, substantial digital camera. And you can do so much with the digital technology. Why are you choosing to go back to this old and very difficult medium instead of using a digital camera and all the powerful software that is available today?
Because I think in some ways, because it's difficult is why I want to do it.
Mhm,
Because,
mhm.
like I've been doing photography since, I don't know, since I could hold a camera. And like really, I think my first camera was one of those iZone cameras that prints out these little stickers.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I just kind of went from there. And in college, anytime I would come up with an assignment, if I came up with an assignment that was really difficult, I usually went for that one. And so when I finally took wet plate and I realized I was pretty good at it, I was like, I think I want to keep doing this. But it's a huge investment. So that's one thing is I had to save up, for, buying the silver nitrate and
Yeah,
the
yeah,
camera
yeah,
and different things. But the biggest is that it's not just the physical medium or understanding the chemistry and all of that. It's also very psychological, wet plate photography, because you have to really understand the chemistry and then trust yourself to know that you're going to be able to do it right. And that
hmm
that
hmm
requires getting over fear and stuff like that, which maybe when you're shooting a wedding, and you really want to do a good job, there's some fear in photography, or if you're doing war photography or protest photography, but um, it's a different type of overcoming.
yeah,
And so
yeah,
and when you figure out all of the different factors, maybe there's something wrong with your chemistry, and you do some research and you correct it, it's very rewarding.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I do shoot weddings, and if for some reason any of my wedding clients were to listen to this, like I enjoy that challenge as well. But I did really grow up with my dad wanted 10 sons and got one daughter. And who was required to do the work of 10 sons. And though I'm not usually, stacking wood and different chores for my dad anymore because I don't live there, I still sort of think I carry that mentality a little bit of,
yeah,
wanting to do that work and to sort of prove myself in different ways. And it's a challenge, but it's a fun challenge. And it's very rewarding in a way that sometimes when I'm troubleshooting my printer or my scanner and I figure it out, it's really rewarding, but I don't get a beautiful image afterwards in the same way,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know? So it's you do all this work, you invest all this money, you overcome all of these fears, and then you get these gorgeous one-of-a-kind images that can help people, document their legacies, or for me, create beautiful, stunning one-of-one fine art. And
Yeah. Yeah.
it's
Well, that's
fun.
that's a very insightful, I think, and articulate way of saying something that's very complex. And so I appreciate that you've been able to do that. And given the limitations of time that we're dealing with, I'm going to have to end our conversation. But that's really a perfect place to do it because I think it shows how much you are really putting of yourself, your time and your energy and your creativity into each image. I'm looking forward to seeing more of it, and I hope our viewers and listeners will too. So, Marie, thanks for taking the time this evening to talk about your work, and I look forward to seeing more of it. And thank you, Marissa, for your technical support.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciated it.